BJ O'Neill here with the Business Coaching Success Podcast. So glad you're here, where I share with you strategies, tools, and tips to be able to grow your business coaching practice to six figures and beyond as a Christian business coach. Let's jump in. Hey, BJ here with Business Coach Mastery on the Business Coaching Success Podcast, third part of a three-part series on 6 areas where to focus in 2024 to build your business coaching practice as a Christian business coach. Now, if you haven't listened to episode 1, actually, before I say that, I'm going to get better at this in 2024. If you've gotten value from the podcast, whether you watch on YouTube or listen on Apple or Spotify or whatever favorite platform that you have, a way that you can help grow the message is simply subscribe, to like. That helps others to hear the message as well, those that have interest just like you in building a business coaching practice as a believer, as a Christ follower. And so if you could do that, that'd mean the world to me and help others as well. This whole episode series is all about just as it pertains to a focus. That's a big word, right? As it pertains to focus, what are the areas, what are some of the things that I need to focus on this year to be successful? And while there's, clearly more than 6, these 6 are pillars. Pillars just means these are kind of holding everything up, and they're really important. It's hard to do all the other things if you don't at least have these things with a focus on improving them, getting better, starting them if you've never started them before, and so on. So you want to make sure that you do that. So this is the third part. We're going to finish the episode in this series, in this episode, or we're going to finish the series, I should say, in this episode. If you haven't listened to the first one, we'll talk about the foundational, just the foundations maybe you've never thought about, or maybe you're thinking about starting a business coaching practice. You just don't know exactly where to start. Like, what's my framework? What do I need to be thinking about? That first episode is all about those foundational principles. I encourage you to go listen to that one. The second episode focuses on 3 of our 6 pillars. That's discipline, consistency, and building a solid business plan for you for the year. So we're going to continue that and finalize our last 3 and a few other things I want to share with you. But go listen to part 1, go listen to part 2. I think that you'll get a lot of value from them. Let's dive in. So we talked about discipline. We talked about consistency. We talked about having a plan. I go into detail of those on the second part. You can go check that out. The third one, or I should say our 4th of our 6 pillars, is your personal brand. And let me explain what that means. If you've got to have some thought around, how am I presenting myself? Like, what are others receiving as I'm communicating with them? What are they thinking about? How are they feeling? Here's the thing. If you don't focus on building your brand, if you don't control the narrative, guess what? They're gonna do it on their own. Meaning, they're gonna have their own narrative to think about you, and if you don't control that, if you don't have intentions on what that needs to be like, what that should sound like, what that should feel like, then you're going to leave it up to everybody else to complete what that means. Why would you do that? You don't want to. Now, let's make the assumption. BJ, I don't consider having a brand. Here's the thing. Just because you start out doing it today doesn't mean it's what you end up with. You're going to edit this. You're going to adjust this. You're going to make changes over time. Things that you consider, you feel, feedback. So here's what you want to begin to do. Number 1, what do I want to be about? Like, what is everything from the look, the feel, the sound, how I interact. I mean, all of that should be intentional, and you can't, do it overnight. So you want to start in small pieces. Much like in our Done For You coaching system that we give our coaches. We talk about small for our clients, our business clients, the businesses that we work with. We talk about small incremental percentage adjustments. Well, that's the same way for us. When we're building a business coaching practice, it's small incremental and percentage adjustments over time. So when you look at building a brand, it's how you appear. Maybe you like to wear suits and ties. I don't. You can tell that. If you watch our podcast, if you watch some of the trainings, you'll notice that I am a t-shirt wearing guy. That's just my thing. It's not just the brand alone. It's just, I'd say 99% of the time, I'm wearing a t-shirt. It's where I feel comfortable. It's also, as it pertains to just my brand, that's what I want to convey. Now, you may not be comfortable with that. I would never do that. I would never go to a networking event and be in a t-shirt. Well, I would, but that's also by design. Well, what does that look for you? Like, how are you going to appear? So when someone sees you, what are they going to feel? What are they going to think? Is business casual and is just a typical golf shirt enough? You tell me. What do you want to do? I have a friend of mine who's in the real estate space. He buys homes and for rentals and flips, and he has a very unique approach to how he does that. His brand, he wears his brand as a hat and his t-shirt all the time in the community. Now you may not want to do that, and I get that, but I'm just saying that he's made the decision from a personal brand to do that. How you come across, some of the clever words that you say, you want to begin to do these things. So when you're sending an email, when you're sending a text, when you are like, I open a lot of emails with, hey man, mainly because that's kind of my style. That's BJ's brand. I'm not saying that you should do that. I'm saying that you want to get granular over time. It's how you look, it's how you sound, and it's your message and how you're writing. Over time, you can begin to build that. I have another friend in the mortgage space who's a coach, national coach for a mortgage company. He's probably one of the best at teaching those loan officers about personal brand. That, again, they being your clients are going to have a perception of you. You need to control it. He does some really cool things. But his point overall is you've got to think about every single interaction needs to be consistent. So when someone sees you, they hear you, they hear from you, they're getting consistency. That's building a brand that they begin to buy into. People Buy You. I've referenced this book many times. People Buy You by Jeb Blunt. It was his first book he wrote about 20 years ago. One of the best sales trainers I've ever met in my entire life. And that book it's about that brand, people buying into you. That's what a personal brand is all about. It's how you're relating to them. It's how you're engaging with them, which one of our other pillars is going to connect back to this in just a second. But you want to consider it's not enough to just go out and begin to go do. You want to think about your brand, how you're coming across. And, some people can get away with some of the silly, clever things that stand out. Sometimes they can be overly too silly, I would argue, to some degree. But again, if that's your thing, that's your thing. And this is everything about somehow, in some ways, how people pass out information about themselves. I've seen clever things about that as part of their brand. The gentleman I'm talking about that coaches in the mortgage space, he has a unique thing when he's teaching on stage. He has a paintball jacket, and that is extended now to paintball, golf bags, paintball. He's all these things around paintball. That's totally him. Now, you may not like that kind of idea, then don't do it. But the point is, you want to connect back so that every time somebody sees that thing, they think about you. Tongue in cheek. And if you're listening only, you've never seen a picture of me or video, this won't make much sense. But I grade very early in life. I'm 50 years of age. I grade very early in life. And so for me, I was like, you know what? I'm going to rock what I have, which is I can't really control, that on my dad's side of the family, we just grade early. So I made a decision to just work with that and utilize the gray as a thing. And that just kind of stuck. I also wear a lot of tennis shoes. One of my oldest sons, older, 18, is big time sneakerhead, and so we have a lot of fun with that. So I wear a lot of Nike, Jordans and low dunks and a number of different types of shoes as a part of the brand. It's also just a fun thing with one of my kids. So I digress. You've got to consider your brand. What are you going to look like? What are you going to sound like? How are you going to come across? And you must be consistent. Part of that consistency, part of that brand, connects back to the fifth pillar you need to consider. This is a big one. Every single conversation you have is going to have a level of questions. So you need to be building questions to engage your prospects, questions to engage in building a network, questions to engage those. They need to be provocative, thought-provoking, sometimes carefully, what's the word? You want to build, what's the word? You don't want to be contrarian just to be a contrarian. But it's okay at times to ask questions that may not be popular and could potentially even be somewhat just edgy. Because that's what you connect that back to your brand. Because when you can get an entrepreneur, a business owner, to begin to think out of the box, and I know that's an overused term, but when you can begin to really think about things that either A, are pain points that they're going through, or B, they are like, man, I've never thought about that before. That's where the Holy Grail really steps into play in terms of they start to really buy into you. So as a part of your brand, you want to just build a list of questions, and I would argue that you build a list of consistent questions that you're kind of always asking. One of my favorite questions ever to ask is, hey, when you lay your head on the pillow at night, like what is the angst as it pertains to growing your business? Like what's the challenge? Like what's the thing you can't figure out? Like what is that? Maybe I can give you some insights. Maybe I can't, but what are you really working through? Because the reality is everyone's working through something. But you can look on the internet, you can use ChatGPT, you can build a list of questions that are, 5 questions that I'm typically always going to engage and ask. And over time, and as you practice, you're going to get better at those things. You're going to recognize how people are responding to you and responding to your questions. You don't want to just sound silly and just ask questions arbitrarily just to ask questions. No, you're building into something, which is going to be the last pillar here in just a moment, that changes everything, okay? But questions, and there are multiple books, a lot of books. John Maxwell has a number of books on questions. There's a number of authors and I would encourage you to really get great at asking compelling, thought-provocative, and questions that lead people to wanting to know more. All right, let me give you a couple of examples. I gave you one, like what's the angst? Here's another one that it's thought-provoking and timely, because this is where you can really begin to get people to kind of consider things that they either they kind of have, it's been circling around, and in their mind, but they haven't really landed the plane yet. So here's another one. So I'm curious, what does business and the results of business look like today compared to what was going on prior to the pandemic, prior to 2020? That's a timely question. And questions like that begin to help people to wrestle with what they're going through. And they begin to connect back to you, that wrestling and that opportunity, whatever, that to you, because you're the guide. That's the beautiful part about asking the right questions, is that they see you as the guide as you are. So when you ask questions like that, then you kind of to lead them more. So where you are, like what are some of the things that you're not doing yet from 2020 that you just feel like, man, if we could just get to that point, I know we could see growth in the business. Like, tell me about that. Because here's what's going to happen. As they're beginning to share, you're learning about them. Think about that. God created you and me. God created the way the mind works. And I train on this all the time about how, the chemicals are released in the body, into the mind, in the brain, in the bloodstream all the time based upon communication and relationships, both good and bad. And when you're asking the right kinds of questions, you're releasing it's impossible for your prospect, done correctly, to release the right kind of chemicals in the brain. One's called oxytocin, one's dopamine. You're probably familiar with that one. That's the trust. That's the building the relationship. That's what matters. So questions to engage are important. And the last one, building authentic relationships that convert to clients. And as far as I'm concerned, and if you've listened to me at all for a period of time, I'm all about building relationships and adding value. And you do that through questions is a big one. And as you're doing that, though, because I'm not a fan of transaction. Transactions are going to be a part of the relationship to here and there, but the relationship itself is not. You cannot manufacture the relationship. Business coaching, when you're doing it right, you're guiding people on a journey, and that creates, or rather, it has to have a symbiotic relationship for it to be successful. And that's why those that are overly salesy and they're very transactional minded, you're not building a legitimate relationship based upon trust, based upon relationship equity, based upon care and concern. You're not. And that's the reason why those who do our transactional approach go through a lot more clients than they need to, because they're not spending quality time building authentic relationships. And so again, this is one of those areas where small percentages over time equal results. So as you get better at it, as you practice, you get feedback, people will tell you. If they're honest with you, and if you're building the right kind of relationship, they're going to say, hey, thank you so much for X, Y, Z. Well, when you hear those kinds of things, you want to log that, and then you want to do more of that. If you get feedback that's slightly negative about your approach in the relationship, don't get offended. Do the right thing, log that, and pray and ask God, like, show me what I may be doing wrong in this area, because we're not perfect. And there might be something about the way you come across. By far, I've learned over the last 20 plus years. Started my first business in 1994. And so I've been in the entrepreneurial game, in the business game, in a multitude of ways for many years. Well, I am nowhere close to the person that I was, 30 years ago, nearly, at the same rate, because I've learned, I've adjusted. Active listening is one of the best ways to build that authentic relationship. Listen to what they really need. Listen to what they're really saying. Everyone's walking around with something going on that they're not sharing. When you can if you look at relationships kind of like an onion, and you're beginning to peel that onion back, that's where the authenticity, and I know that's an overused word, but that's really where the power comes in, where people really want to be with you, and they want more of you. Yes, they want the strategies, they want you to guide them to help them grow their business, and that's where you're talking about, you want to spend less time in lead gen, build more time in building solid relationships that last a long time, and you won't have to spend as much time generating more leads for more clients. Simple. It really is. So there you go. We've covered the foundational principles in part 1. I encourage you to go listen to it. We uncovered the first 3 pillars in part 2, talking about how discipline is so important as a bedrock of building a legitimate coaching practice, what consistency does, or worse, the lack thereof, and why it's so important to have a business plan today. In this episode, we covered why having a personal brand is so critical, the kinds of questions that you need to engage, and the last pillar, to build authentic relationships that convert into clients. I hope this series has meant something to you. I hope it's added value to you. If you are considering building a business coaching practice, you just want to learn more about it, you can go to businesscoachmastery.com. That's businesscoachmastery.com. And you'll get some information there. If you want to book a call and we can talk further with myself or someone on my team, you can do that there as well. All right? Until next time, take care.